I ordered beautiful one, not a fat one. Mountain man saw the obese girl. Rejected at Beerhouse. The winter wind howled through dust water like a wounded beast, carrying with it the smell of dust, horse manure, and desperation. The town sat at the edge of the Grey Hoof Mountains, a collection of wooden structures clinging to existence in a land where survival was never guaranteed. It was 1847, and the Wild West knew no mercy for the weak, the poor, or the different. Emily May wiped down the sticky counter of the Dustwater Beerhouse, her calloused hands moving in practiced circles. The establishment was hardly grand. Wooden planks for walls, mismatched chairs, and a bar that leaned slightly to the left. But on cold nights like this, when wagon trains stopped for shelter and cowboys came down from the ranges, it was the only source of warmth and human contact for miles. At 23 years old, Emily had learned to make herself invisible. She moved between tables like a shadow, her rounded figure wrapped in a plain brown dress that had been let out 3 times. Her mother had died giving birth to her younger brother, who survived only 6 months. Her father, once a strong blacksmith, now lay in their one-room shack, coughing blood into rags. The Beerhouse was their only lifeline, and Emily worked every shift she could, enduring what she must. "More whiskey here, girl!" A red-faced cowboy slammed his cup on the table. Emily hurried over, keeping her eyes down. She had learned that looking at men directly only invited trouble. The door crashed open, bringing a gust of freezing air and a group of well-dressed men from the east. They wore fine coats and polished boots, merchants by the look of them, traveling west with a supply caravan. The leader, a portly man with a waxed mustache, surveyed the room with barely concealed disgust. "What a hovel," he muttered, but settled at a table nonetheless. The wilderness offered few choices. Emily approached their table, her heart already heavy with the weight of anticipated contempt. She knew that look in their eyes, the way Eastern folk saw her as something less than human, an offense to their refined sensibilities. "What can I get for you, gentlemen?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible above the din. The leader looked up, and his face twisted with theatrical revulsion. "Christ almighty!" he exclaimed loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "I ordered a beautiful one, not a fat one!" The Beerhouse erupted in laughter. Men slapped their thighs and elbowed each other. Emily felt her face burn with familiar shame, her throat constricting until she could barely breathe. She stood frozen, wishing the floor would open and swallow her whole. "Send us someone pleasant to look at, won't you?" the man continued, preening in the attention. "Surely this establishment has at least one girl who won't curdle our whiskey with her appearance." More laughter. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her serving tray like a shield. She had endured countless insults before, but something about this night, the cold, her father's worsening cough, the relentless weight of simply existing in a body the world despised, made this cut deeper than all the others. Then a chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. From the darkest corner of the room, a man stood. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the space around him. His face was weathered like old leather, marked with scars that spoke of violence survived. He wore buckskin and fur, and his long dark hair was tied back with a leather cord. This was Elias Crow, the mountain man who came down from Grey Hoof once a month for supplies, and whom most people had the good sense to leave alone. "Apologize," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. The room fell silent. The Eastern merchant looked up, irritation crossing his features. "I beg your pardon?" "To the lady," Elias continued, moving forward with the slow, deliberate gait of a predator. "Apologize." The merchant laughed nervously. "I hardly think—" Elias's hand shot out and seized the man by his expensive collar, lifting him partially out of his chair. "I don't care what you think. Apologize to her, or I'll drag you outside and teach you some manners the mountain way." The merchant's face turned purple, his companions frozen in their seats. I apologize," he gasped. "Say it like you mean it." "I apologize, miss. I spoke out of turn." Elias held him a moment longer, then released him with enough force to send him sprawling back into his chair. The mountain man turned to Emily, and for the first time that night, she saw something in a man's eyes that wasn't contempt. It was respect. "You're worth more than all of them combined," Elias said quietly, so only she could hear. Then he returned to his corner, leaving Emily standing there with tears streaming down her round cheeks. But this time, they weren't entirely tears of shame. 3 months passed. Spring came reluctantly to Dustwater, bringing mud instead of flowers. Emily's father grew weaker, and she worked longer hours to pay for the medicine that did little good. But something had changed since that winter night. Elias Crow came down from the mountains more frequently, every 2 weeks now, instead of once a month. He always sat in the same corner, always ordered the same whiskey, and always, Emily noticed with her heart racing, positioned himself where he could see her clearly. She told herself she was imagining things. Why would a man like that, strong, self-sufficient, mysterious, pay attention to someone like her? But she couldn't help noticing the small things, the way his jaw tightened when other customers spoke roughly to her, the way his eyes followed her movements across the room, the way he nursed one drink for hours, as if he had no purpose there except to occupy that chair. For her part, Emily found herself thinking about him during every moment she wasn't actively working. She memorized the pattern of scars on his hands. She noticed when he got his hair cut. She lay awake at night, creating elaborate fantasies where he spoke to her, really spoke to her, about something other than whiskey and weather. One evening, she noticed his leather coat had a tear at the shoulder. Without thinking, she approached his table. "Mr. Crow," she said hesitantly, "your coat is torn. I could mend it for you if you'd like. No charge." He looked up at her with those intense gray eyes, and for a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he nodded slowly. "That's kind of you, Miss Emily." He knew her name. Her heart performed acrobatics in her chest. He shrugged off the coat, revealing a scarred forearm and a glimpse of a much larger scar across his chest. Emily took the coat carefully, as if it were made of gold, and hurried to the back room. Her hands shook as she threaded the needle. She took her time with the repair, making each stitch perfect, pouring into the leather all the tenderness she could never express aloud. When she returned it an hour later, Elias examined the work with approval. "You have skilled hands," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "My late wife used to sew. You remind me of her in that way." Late wife. The words hung in the air between them. Emily wanted to ask more, but didn't dare. Elias pulled the coat back on and left without another word, but he placed twice the usual amount on the table for his drink. After that night, Emily found gifts left at the back door of the Beerhouse: a haunch of venison, a basket of wild mushrooms, a rabbit, already cleaned and dressed. She never saw who left them, but she knew. Everyone knew. The mountain man was courting the fat girl from the Beerhouse in his own strange way. The town talked, of course. Women whispered behind their hands. Men made crude jokes. But something had shifted. When Elias Crow thought you worthy of his attention, people reconsidered their own judgments, or at least kept them quieter. Emily sat by her father's bedside one late spring evening, wringing out a cloth in cool water to place on his burning forehead. He drifted in and out of fever dreams, occasionally mumbling about the old days when her mother was alive and the forge burned bright. "Emily," he whispered, his eyes suddenly clear, "you're a good girl, too good for this place." "Don't talk like that, Pa. You'll get better." He shook his head weakly. "I'm dying, daughter. We both know it. But before I go, I need to tell you something." He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "You're beautiful. Your mother was the same, soft and round and lovely as a summer peach. Don't let this cruel world tell you otherwise." Emily fought back tears. "Yes, Pa." "That mountain man," her father continued, a slight smile on his cracked lips. "He sees what I see. Don't be afraid of happiness, Emily May. You deserve it more than anyone." 3 days later, her father passed quietly in his sleep. Emily buried him in the town cemetery, standing alone by the grave in her black dress, while a preacher mumbled prayers. She didn't see Elias at the funeral, but when she returned to her empty shack, she found firewood stacked neatly by the door and a wreath of mountain flowers hanging from a nail. The flowers were clumsy arranged, clearly done by rough hands unused to gentle work, and that somehow made them more precious than anything she'd ever received. Up in the mountains, Elias Crow sat by his own fire, staring into the flames and seeing ghosts. Her name had been Sarah. She was small and quick, with dark hair and a laugh like music. They'd married young, built a cabin together in a green valley where the hunting was good. She gave him a son, little Thomas, who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Elias had been gone 3 days on a hunting trip when the raiders came. They were deserters from some long-forgotten militia, turned bandits by war and whiskey. They took what they wanted and burned what they couldn't carry. By the time Elias saw the smoke and ran back, his cabin was an inferno. He heard Thomas crying inside. Without thinking, Elias charged through the flames. He found his son trapped under a fallen beam, pulled him free, and carried him outside. But Sarah was deeper in the cabin, already unconscious from the smoke. Elias tried to go back in, but the roof collapsed. He stood there holding his screaming son while his wife burned, and there was nothing he could do. Thomas died 2 days later from his burns, and Elias Crow died with him. In every way that mattered, the man who walked out of that valley was something else, something harder, colder, purpose-driven only by the need to survive one more day. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of solitude in the mountains, speaking to no one, needing no one. He'd convinced himself he preferred it that way. Attachment meant pain. Love meant loss. Better to be alone. Then he saw Emily take that insult in the Beerhouse, saw the way she stood there absorbing cruelty like she believed she deserved it, and something ancient and sleeping in his chest stirred to life. She reminded him that there was still injustice worth fighting, still innocence worth protecting. And when she smiled, those rare times when she forgot to be invisible, something in him remembered what it was like to feel human. But Elias was terrified. He could face down bears, outlaws, and blizzards without flinching, but the thought of caring for someone again, of having something to lose, made him want to retreat deeper into the mountains and never return. What if he failed her the way he'd failed Sarah? What if his love brought only destruction? So he watched from his corner, left anonymous gifts, and told himself it was enough to keep her safe from a distance. It had to be enough. Anything more would be selfish, would be dangerous. The best thing he could do for Emily May was stay away. Emily, for her part, believed herself unworthy of even his distant attention. Every time she caught him looking at her, she assumed he was evaluating her the way others did, finding her wanting. The idea that Elias Crow might actually care for her seemed as impossible as sprouting wings and flying to the moon. They were two people separated by mere feet, both drowning in the same loneliness, both too afraid to reach across the gap. Summer came harsh to Dustwater. The heat turned the streets to dust and drove everyone indoors during the worst of the day. The Beerhouse did less business, which meant Emily's wages dropped to almost nothing. She took on washing and mending work to make ends meet, her fingers raw from lye soap and needle pricks. One August evening, a group of cowboys rode in, the same group that had been present the night Elias humiliated the Eastern merchant. Their leader, a scarred man named Cutter Jack, had nursed his resentment all these months. He'd been friends with that merchant, had lost face when he didn't defend him. Now, drunk and mean, he saw an opportunity for revenge. Emily was closing up the Beerhouse late, sweeping the floor by lamplight. She didn't hear them approach until Cutter Jack's shadow fell across the doorway. Well, well, the mountain man's little pig, all alone. Emily's blood went cold. She backed toward the bar, gripping the broom handle. The Beerhouse is closed, gentlemen. Please come back tomorrow. Oh, we're not here for drinks. Cutter Jack stepped inside, his 3 companions following. We're here to send a message to your mountain man. Tell him not to embarrass his betters. I don't know what you mean. Please leave. You don't give orders here, fat girl. He moved closer, and Emily could smell the whiskey and malice on him. Your man likes to play hero. Let's see if he comes running when we teach you some manners. Emily swung the broom, catching Cutter Jack across the face. He stumbled back with a curse, then lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. She screamed, the sound cutting through the quiet night. One of the other men stuffed a rag in her mouth, while a third tied her hands. They dragged her out the back door and toward the tree line. We'll leave her tied up in the woods for a night, Cutter Jack said, touching his bleeding nose. Let the mountain man find what's left. Serves them both right. They hauled her deeper into the forest, Emily fighting every step. Finally, they tied her to a tree about 2 miles from town, deep enough that her muffled screams wouldn't reach anyone. Cutter Jack leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. Nothing personal, sweetness. But men like him need to learn you can't interfere in other people's business. And women like you need to learn your place. They left her there in the darkness. Emily's tears soaked through the gag as she struggled against the ropes. She was going to die here, alone, and no one would find her until it was too late. She thought of Elias, and her heart broke not just for herself, but for the words she'd never said. I love you, she thought desperately. I've loved you since that first night. Please don't blame yourself when they find me. This isn't your fault. But 6 miles away, in his cabin on the mountainside, Elias Crow suddenly stood. He couldn't explain it, a feeling, an instinct, the same kind of premonition that had saved his life a dozen times in the wilderness. Something was wrong. Emily was in danger. He grabbed his rifle, his knife, and ran. Elias moved through the forest like a wolf on a scent, reading signs invisible to normal men, broken branches, disturbed earth, the faint smell of whiskey and fear. He'd tracked wounded elk through worse terrain. This was child's play. But his heart, his long, dormant, carefully buried heart, hammered with terror he hadn't felt since he'd seen his cabin burning. If he was too late, if they'd hurt her, if she was... No, he wouldn't think it. He pushed harder, his powerful legs eating up the miles. He found Cutter Jack's group camped in a clearing, passing a bottle and laughing about what they'd done. Elias counted 4 men, armed but drunk and careless. The rage that filled him then was cold and absolute. He stepped out of the trees. "Where is she?" The men scrambled to their feet, reaching for weapons. Cutter Jack, to his credit, didn't reach for his gun. He recognized the look in Elias's eyes, the look of a man past reason, past mercy. "Now hold on, mountain man. We didn't hurt the girl, just taught her—" Elias didn't let him finish. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and struck Cutter Jack with the butt of his rifle, sending him sprawling. The other 3 went for their guns. Elias shot the first one in the shoulder, kicked the second one's knee with a crack that echoed through the trees, and slammed the third against a tree trunk hard enough to knock him unconscious. Cutter Jack tried to crawl away. Elias planted a boot on his back. "Where is she?" "North. 1/4 mile north, tied to an oak tree. I swear we didn't touch her, just tied her up. Don't kill me." Elias wanted to kill him, wanted it more than he'd wanted anything in years. Instead, he knocked the man unconscious and ran north. He found her in the darkness, still tied to the tree, shivering from cold and shock. Her eyes widened when she saw him, fresh tears streaming down her face. Elias cut the ropes with his knife and gently removed the gag. Emily collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. "I've got you," he murmured, wrapping his coat around her trembling form. "You're safe now. I've got you." I thought I was going to die," she gasped between sobs. "And I never told you." "Told me what?" She pulled back to look at him, her face dirty and tear-stained and absolutely beautiful in the moonlight. "That I love you. I've loved you for so long, and I thought I'd die with it locked inside, and—" Elias stopped her words with a kiss. It was gentle, reverent, nothing like the rough man he appeared to be. When he pulled back, his scarred hands cradled her face like she was made of porcelain. "Emily May," he said hoarsely, "I have loved you from the moment you took that insult and didn't break. You're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. I stayed away because I was afraid. Afraid I'd fail you the way I failed my first family. Afraid loving you would bring you harm. But I can't stay away any more. I won't. If you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life protecting you, cherishing you, making sure you never doubt your worth again." Emily's sob turned into something between a laugh and a cry. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll have you. I'll have you any way you'll let me." They held each other as the night turned slowly toward dawn. 2 broken people made whole by finding each other. When the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elias lifted Emily into his arms and carried her toward home. Elias's cabin was small but solid, built from timber he'd cut himself. It sat in a valley protected from the worst winds, with a stream nearby and hunting grounds that stretched for miles. Emily had never seen anywhere more beautiful. He was careful with her, almost shy. He built up the fire, made her tea from mountain herbs, and gave her his own bed while he slept by the hearth. Over the following days, as Emily recovered from her ordeal, they talked, really talked, about his past, her past, their fears and hopes and dreams. They shared stories and silence, laughter and grief. They learned each other in the way only two people who've both known profound loneliness can. "I'm still afraid," Elias admitted one evening, watching her mend one of his shirts by firelight. "Afraid of losing you, afraid I'm not good enough." Emily looked up. Her needle paused mid-stitch. "Do you think I'm not afraid? Elias, I spent my whole life believing I wasn't worthy of love, that my body made me unlovable. You're the first person who's ever looked at me and seen something worth cherishing. I'm terrified every day that I'll wake up and discover this is a dream." He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her soft hands in his calloused ones. "It's not a dream. And your body. Emily, when I look at you, I see warmth and softness and life. I see a woman who survived cruelty and kept her kindness. I see the only light I've known in 15 years of darkness. You are beautiful, and I'll tell you that every day until you believe it." She pulled him close, and they stayed that way as the fire burned low, two survivors finding peace in each other's arms. A month later, Elias took her on a walk to a meadow high on the mountainside. Wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors, and the view stretched for miles. He'd been quiet all morning, nervous in a way she'd never seen him. "Emily May," he finally said, dropping to one knee in the flowers. He pulled out a simple ring, silver, handmade, clearly crafted by his own rough hands. "I know I'm not much. I'm a broken man living in the wilderness. I can't give you fancy dresses or a big house, but I can give you my whole heart, such as it is. I can give you loyalty, protection, and a love that will never waver. Will you marry me?" Emily looked at this fierce, gentle man kneeling before her and knew that every moment of pain in her life had been worth it to arrive at this one. "Yes," she said clearly, "1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, and stood to kiss her with the mountains as their witness. They married on a crisp October morning in the valley beside Elias's cabin. A traveling preacher performed the ceremony. To Emily's surprise, many townspeople from Dustwater made the trek up the mountain. The Beerhouse owner who'd been kind to her, a few women who'd quietly defended her over the years, even some of the cowboys who'd learned to respect Elias's fierce protection of his woman. Emily wore a white dress she'd sewn herself, simple but lovely, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Elias wore his best buckskin, his long hair tied back, looking uncomfortable but determined in his finery. When the preacher asked, "Do you take this woman?" Elias's voice rang out clear and strong, "I do, forever." And when it was Emily's turn, she looked into his gray eyes and said, "I do, with all my heart." Their kiss sealed vows that needed no church or papers to make them real. They had already been bound by trauma and healing, by seeing each other's deepest wounds and choosing to love anyway. The celebration was simple: roasted game, fresh bread, whiskey, and fiddle music. As the sun set and their guests departed, Elias and Emily stood hand in hand, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. "Are you happy?" Elias asked quietly. Emily leaned against his strong shoulder. "I didn't know happiness like this existed. Did you?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm learning. You're teaching me." They went into their cabin together, closing the door on the world outside. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many in the harsh wilderness, they would face them together. A year and a half later, Emily gave birth to a daughter in the depths of winter. The baby came early, and for hours Elias paced outside the cabin while the midwife from Dustwater worked inside. He'd lost one family this way. He wouldn't lose another. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, Elias burst through the door. The midwife smiled. "You have a healthy daughter, Mr. Crow, and your wife is fine, just tired." Emily lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Elias approached on shaking legs. The baby was small and red, with a shock of dark hair and fierce little fists. When she opened her eyes, they were gray like his. When she yawned, her cheeks were round like Emily's. "She's perfect," he breathed. "What should we name her?" Elias looked at his wife, this woman who'd given him back his humanity, who'd trusted him with her heart despite every reason not to. "Sarah," he said, "after my first wife, and Grace for what you've given me, Sarah Grace Crow." Emily smiled through happy tears. "It's perfect." Elias sat carefully on the bed, putting his arm around Emily and gazing at their daughter. He'd been certain he would never know this joy again, family, love, belonging. But Emily had proven that even the most broken things could be made whole, that love lost could be found again in unexpected forms. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up, for being brave enough to love me." Emily kissed his scarred cheek. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for teaching me I was worth loving." Little Sarah made a small sound, and they both laughed. Outside, snow fell gently over the mountain valley, covering the world in silent white. Inside the cabin, a new family began their story, built not on fairy tale perfection, but on the deeper magic of two damaged souls choosing each other day after day in a world that had tried to break them both. 3 years later, Elias and Emily sat on their porch watching Sarah toddle after butterflies in the meadow. The little girl had grown into a healthy, happy child, chubby-cheeked like her mother, strong-willed like her father. "Papa, look!" Sarah called, holding up a dandelion. "Beautiful, little one," Elias called back, his stern face softening into a smile reserved only for his family. Emily leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment settling over her like a warm blanket. Sometimes she thought about her old life in Dustwater, the insults, the shame, the crushing loneliness. It seemed like a different lifetime, a different person. "Do you ever regret it?" Elias asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Leaving town, living up here away from civilization?" Emily looked at him in surprise. "Regret? Elias, this is the first time in my life I've been truly happy. The first time I've felt safe, loved enough. How could I regret that?" He kissed her forehead. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm selfish, keeping you up here." "You're not keeping me anywhere. I chose this. I choose you every single day." Their peace was occasionally interrupted by trips to Dustwater for supplies. The townspeople had grown accustomed to seeing Elias and Emily together, and most had learned to keep their opinions to themselves. Those who hadn't learned quickly when they encountered Elias's icy stare. But more surprising were the women who now approached Emily with friendship. Other women who'd felt invisible, who'd been told they were too much or not enough, who saw in Emily's happiness a possibility they'd never dared imagine. "How did you do it?" a young woman asked her once while Emily was buying fabric in the general store. "How did you get him to see you?" Emily thought about the question carefully. "I didn't try to make him see me," she finally answered. "I just existed, kept going even when it was hard, and somehow that was enough for the right person. Don't change yourself trying to be seen. The right man will see you exactly as you are." The woman nodded thoughtfully, and Emily saw a spark of hope in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Back in the mountains, Elias taught Sarah to track animals, to read weather signs, to move quietly through the forest. Emily taught her to read and write, to sew and cook, to tell stories and sing songs. They gave her a childhood neither of them had fully enjoyed, one filled with security, affection, and the absolute certainty that she was loved. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they lay together under firs while Sarah slept in her small bed across the room, Emily whispered, "Do you ever think about that night? The night in the Beerhouse?" "Every day," Elias admitted. "I think about how close I came to letting fear keep me from this, from you. I think about it too, about how I almost let shame convince me I wasn't worthy of being loved." She turned to face him in the darkness. "We almost missed each other, Elias. Two people meant to fit together, and we almost let the world's cruelty keep us apart." He pulled her closer. "But we didn't. We found each other despite everything. That's what matters." "Yes," Emily agreed, "that's what matters." Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of seasons yet to come. Inside the cabin, 3 hearts beat in harmony, a family forged not by chance or convenience, but by the stubborn determination to believe in love when the world said it was impossible. Years later, when Sarah was grown and gone to start her own life, when Elias's hair had turned fully silver and Emily's hands were gnarled with arthritis, they would still sit on that porch together, still share stories, still hold hands like young lovers discovering each other for the first time. And sometimes, travelers passing through Dustwater would hear the old tale about the mountain man who saw beauty where others saw only scorn, about the woman who learned to see her own worth through the eyes of someone who truly loved her, about a single moment of cruelty in a beerhouse that somehow, impossibly, led to a lifetime of grace. "It's just a story," some would say dismissively, but others, the ones who'd felt invisible or unworthy or broken, would hear it and think, maybe there's hope for me too. And in their mountain valley, Elias and Emily Crow would smile at each other, knowing they'd become something neither had ever expected, not just survivors, not just lovers, but proof that the deepest wounds can heal, that the loneliest hearts can find home, and that beauty has nothing to do with what the world sees and everything to do with what the right person recognizes when they finally, truly look